From MTN News, this is Montana This Morning.
Good Wednesday morning. It's 5 o'clock. Welcome to Montana This Morning. I'm Victoria Hill. Thank you so much for starting your day with us. Our top story this morning, the coronavirus continued to spread unchecked in much of the U.S. The nation set a single-day record for new infections again yesterday, with more than 135,000 confirmed cases. Over 1,400 deaths were reported, pushing the country's pandemic death toll above 239,000. Infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci said he expects Pfizer will seek an emergency use authorization for its COVID-19 vaccine within the next week and a half. The U.S. also hit a record number of COVID-19 hospitalizations, but health experts have hope most people will recover. Almost 62,000 are in the hospital right now. However, an infectious disease researcher with Harvard says we now have more tools and knowledge when it comes to handling cases. Higher percentages of patients going into intensive care are coming out alive. More treatment options are also available, along with more widespread testing. 487 people are in hospitals here in Montana, and help is on the way. According to a spokesperson for Senator Steve Daines, Montana will get over 700 vials of the newly approved Eli Lilly antibody drug this week. The state reported more than 1,100 cases yesterday. They weren't all from one day, though, due to a computer error that backed up some of the reporting. 6 more people passed away, and now a total of 490 deaths have been attributed to COVID-19 in Montana. In Wyoming, health leaders announced 13 more deaths related to COVID-19. All of them happened in October, and nearly all of the patients had underlying health conditions. 5 of those deaths were from Laramie County, and 4 of those patients were residents of a long-term care facility dealing with an outbreak. Ed joins us here now with a check of today's weather forecast for this Wednesday. What's going on, Ed?
Yeah, we got some snow in the western portion of the state. Let's start with the first interstate ICAM here in Billings. A very mild 27 degrees with just a little bit of a westerly breeze into the mix. But the wind will become a bigger part of the weather, especially as we get to the weekend, and temperatures will continue to warm up. Our afternoon readings and our morning readings really aren't going to be all that much different here across southern Montana and northern Wyoming. Had a report of 4 inches of snow around Missoula, some light snow but ice around Great Falls, Helena, then also some wind in the mix, especially you can see from Havre, Lewistown down towards Livingston this morning. Stronger gusts also around Glasgow and Jordan. There's a line of some light snow that'll move off towards the northwest corner of North Dakota this morning. But we're looking for temperatures starting off 20s, 30s. There just isn't much of a warm up thanks to a cold front that will move through. So readings will hover in the 20s most of the day, and then we could hit some low 30s. But the warmer temperatures will be on the way. We'll let you know when in a little while.
We'll welcome them with open arms. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thanks.
In education news, there's a renewed plea for substitute teachers here in Billings as another elementary school classroom has been placed into quarantine. Across the state, a lack of subs is one of the factors forcing several schools to go remote. Schools in the Bitterroot Valley, Columbia Falls, and the entire Great Falls district will close their doors starting next week. If you would like to be a substitute teacher, there's information on how to do so in this story at ktvq.com. In national news, the Affordable Care Act is likely going to survive a challenge in the Supreme Court. A hearing was held on the healthcare system yesterday. GOP lawyers argued a 2017 congressional amendment that eliminates the penalty for failing to get insurance invalidates the entire law. However, lawyers supporting the ACA say it can survive without that mandate. Both Justices John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh seem to agree. Kavanaugh called it a straightforward case, adding they will remove the mandate and leave the rest of the ACA intact. President-elect Joe Biden is confident Republicans will start embracing him as the winner of the election, but many high-ranking members of the GOP are holding back as President Trump continues to launch legal challenges. CBS's Deborah Alfarone reports.
President-elect Joe Biden is preparing to take office despite President Trump's refusal to concede.
I just think it's an embarrassment. I think it will not help the president's legacy.
Speaking to reporters in Delaware, Mr. Biden says he hopes to announce his cabinet picks this month.
We're going to do exactly what we'd be doing if he had conceded and said we've won, which we have. And so there's nothing really changing.
The Trump administration is blocking the Biden team from accessing federal agencies as well as funding needed for the transition. President Trump continues to claim widespread voter fraud despite providing no evidence.
Mr. Vice President, is it time to concede? Is there really any evidence of fraud?
Many congressional Republicans have refused to acknowledge the results.
The president wasn't defeated by huge numbers. In fact, he may not have been defeated at all.
But in the closest races of the election, Georgia and Arizona, the president trails Mr. Biden by more than 12,000 votes in both.
Wildly inappropriate.
Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker is one of the few Republicans speaking out.
And what this president is doing at this point in time is not in the best interest of this country.
President Trump hasn't made any official public appearances since last Thursday. Today, he's expected to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, Washington.
Going into last week's election in Montana, most public polls showed the big statewide races were relatively close, with a slight edge for Republicans. But the final outcome had GOP candidates winning big. MTN's Mike Dennison explains why the polls missed the mark in Montana.
Most polls had Montana's U.S. Senate contest between Senator Steve Daines and Governor Steve Bullock a statistical toss-up, and the same for the U.S. House race. They also said President Trump and Republican gubernatorial candidate Greg Gianforte were leading, but only by single digits. Yet not one of those races was decided by less than 10 points, with winning margins anywhere from 60,000 to 100,000 votes. University of Montana political scientist Rob Seldine says one reason for the disconnect may be that Trump supporters don't like responding to polls.
People who support Donald Trump are less likely to take those calls and to agree to participate in a poll because they see it as another one of these elite institutions that's biased against them and their president, part of the fake media, this whole narrative.
But another possible factor is the record voter turnout last week, which saw tens of thousands of new voters, many of them younger.
Those people are the least likely to respond to most polls. They're the ones who showed up. So they didn't show up in the polls, and they did show up in terms of voting.
And it appears they favored Republicans. Some pollsters, however, didn't miss the spread. Emerson Polling from Boston polled Montanans in early October and had Daines winning by 9 points. He won by 10. And Gianforte and Trump each winning by 13 points. They won by 12 and 17, respectively. Emerson used only text messages to cell phones and says it felt it had a good, accurate sample of Montana voters. Republican pollster Eric Iverson of Missoula also told MTN News some polls didn't properly account for the partisan makeup of Montana voters, which is increasingly Republican. He says his polls for the Daines campaign figured Republicans outnumbered Democrats by anywhere from 11 to 14 points in Montana, and his polls never had Daines trailing Bullock. Pollsters agree that partisan alignment of voters is becoming a dominant factor, and maybe that's the simple reason that a big turnout means big Republican victories in Montana.
There are just a lot more Republicans in Montana than there are Democrats. And so if you have a higher turnout, well, that might very well mean that you just are turning out more Republicans who, for whatever reason, haven't chosen to vote in the past.
So when almost everyone votes in Montana, Republicans win. If that's true, Democrats may have a long road back to competitiveness in Montana politics. Reporting from Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
Last week's voter turnout was 81% and beat Montana's previous record by more than 94,000 voters. Most polls accurately predicted the strong victory for marijuana legalization in Montana. Supporters say it will generate revenue and free up police to focus on serious crimes. But as MTN's Tim McGonigal reports, not everyone is praising the passage.
When they talk about, the marijuana back in the 70s, this is not the same. It literally almost was equivalent to smoking grass.
The potency of the recreational marijuana of today is just one of the concerns Christy Ponte Stroop has about the passage of 2 measures legalizing the substance in Montana. She's also hoping state and local leaders will look closely at the number of places it can be bought.
I would really hate to see there be as many dispensaries as there are casinos in our town.
Starting in January, possession and use of small amounts of recreational marijuana will be available to people 21 and over, with a full rollout possible by October. Christy says education and awareness will be key, and from what she's seen in other states, she's concerned about kids getting their hands on the drug.
And it's definitely increased youth access and youth using marijuana. We've definitely seen that. And from a treatment perspective, it is an addictive drug.
Megan Bailey works at Gateway Recovery Center in Great Falls. She wasn't surprised the measures passed. She says now that the drug will be legal, treatment specialists can educate people the way they do about other addictive substances.
We consistently will talk to people about, alcohol, right? Alcohol is legal, but a lot of people have a problem with alcohol. And so there's no reason to think that people couldn't also have a problem with marijuana when it's legal.
Megan says marijuana poses mental health concerns. It can be effective treatment for people with psychiatric disorders like PTSD, but she says the drug can also lead to anxiety. And for people in recovery, marijuana can have a serious impact.
Somebody who does use marijuana following treatment for heroin or meth or alcohol is more likely to relapse on their drug of choice.
With a legislative session set to convene in January, the measure could see some adjustments. Bailey hopes that means more treatment resources.
My hope is that the state is really going to look at where are we going to put some of these tax dollars. Are we going to put them in treatment? Because, here's the thing, people are using it. They've been using it. And so can we now address that a little more directly?
In Great Falls, Tim McGonigal, MTN News.
Legalizing marijuana in Montana also means decriminalizing it, which means someone who has it on their record may be able to get it removed. Experts say a person can file for expungement under the new law. A judge would then have to option to downgrade the charges from felonies to misdemeanors or civil infractions. They could also throw out the charges completely or do nothing if the person is deemed a public safety threat. It would take a while for judges to rule on expungement cases.
This depends a lot on how the courts want to hold their own procedure, and every court is different. Typically, in the cases in which we've sought expungement for misdemeanor offenses under a different section of the code, that typically takes a couple of months.
Even under the new law, it is still illegal to possess more than 2 ounces of marijuana. And before we take a break, the first astronauts arrived on the International Space Station 20 years ago this month. Since then, there have been humans living in space every single day. As reporter Maya Rodriguez shows us, this is a milestone that has led to research and discoveries benefiting all of us back here on Earth.
3, 2, 1, 0. Engines ignition, liftoff.
250 miles above Earth, the International Space Station remains in constant orbit around the planet.
It's an amazing facility. It's about the size of a 5-bedroom house.
An incredible feat of construction involving space agencies from multiple countries and astronauts like Rex Walheim, who flew 3 missions to the International Space Station.
So the first portion of the space station program was basically constructing it. So that was what I was mostly involved with. Bringing pieces up to the space station, doing spacewalks to bolt new pieces on and to activate them.
In the now 20 years since the space station welcomed the first crew, it's become a place of valuable research for companies like TechShot.
The people that are making the experimental instruments that go in there are people like TechShot.
We visited TechShot's facility near the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. Among their work on the space station, measuring bone loss for use in developing treatments for osteoporosis.
So understanding osteoporosis is obviously of great interest to people on Earth. So drug companies have been a lot of our customers.
TechShot also created a biofabrication facility, seen here getting installed on the space station. Using stem cells, the machine can 3D print human cartilage, a process that works best in a zero-gravity space environment. The idea? To eventually be able to 3D print whole organs that could be used in transplants.
It's in the future, but it's not as far away as you might think.
Advances that might not be possible without the space station.
The young people today have never known a time when there hasn't been humans in space. That's really amazing.
A whole generation that sees humans living and working in space as an everyday part of life. On Merritt Island, Florida, I'm Maya Rodriguez.
Advanced water purification systems are another thing the astronauts have helped develop for use on Earth. Astronauts have also collected valuable images from high above the Earth to help support first responders to natural disasters.